quality of service has been a big topic for the last few years in the CDN space, and there was almost no end of volunteers to come on this panel. So we've got quite a big panel here. We've got a panel of 4. Mark, do you want to introduce the panel and your panelists?
Yes, and we have quite a few. We have 4, all 4 different angles, which is very interesting for the discussion, I think. I would like to give the word to all 4 panelists for roughly 30 seconds because we don't have much time. Steven, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey guys, I'm Steven Tripsis. I'm a solutions architect at Zype, and we're an online infrastructure of video. We're a SaaS platform. And I primarily responsible for video streaming, live streaming, encoding, etc. QoS, QoE.
Good. Emily.
Hi, you've got Emily Parley, lead product manager at NS1 here. I'm based out of New York. So essentially NS1, we provide advanced traffic management solutions based on our advanced DNS platform. So I specifically work on Pulsar, which is our active traffic steering solution. And yeah, I get to work with some leading cutting edge teams that focus on how to make sure that they're providing the best experience to their users. And I've been here for almost 3 years now.
Perfect, perfect. Pierre-Louis.
Hey, I'm Pierre-Louis Theron. I am one of the founder and run as a CEO at Streamroot for the past 6 years prior to the acquisition by CenturyLink. So I have a Streamroot t-shirt, a CenturyLink hat today. I've been at CenturyLink for the past 6 months now as a VP product in charge of content delivery services. So working in the CDN and the Streamroot products that we are going to talk about. And for the people who don't know who we do, what we're doing, we are providing primarily client-side CDN optimization, including peer-to-peer CDN technology, as well as load balancing technology from the client perspective.
Thanks, Peter. Ken Heron?
I am Ken Heron with Telestream, product manager on our cloud services team. And we're primarily helping customers prepare their content for distribution, delivering that into the CDN environment. And then we build a number of tools to help sort of measure the performance and health of their direct-to-consumer over-the-top video services as delivered through their CDN partners.
Perfect, thank you. Thanks all for joining. I would like to start with Steven. Steven, Zype offers, as you said, a SaaS solution for video. You offer this towards different markets, towards different verticals. So if you then look at QoS, where do you get the actual demand from? Is there a specific market, specific vertical where you see most of those questions come from?
I think in terms of Zype, because the spectrum of clients is so wide and their business models are so diverse, that the diversity of our clients more or less requires us to be inherently diligent about the content to which we serve. So ultimately, every chunk matters. And what I try to do is find a common denominator between all of the disparate content being delivered and effectively try to tweak where we can to make that something that all of our clients can leverage. Now, that's not all cases. A lot of the times, and just to go through like quick things that I typically look for, and there are requirements around QoS for certain products. But you know, what endpoint was typically delivered to adds to the complexity of what the time to first frame was, what the time to first byte was. And if you pile those all up together, every chunk matters ultimately. So what we try to do is do analysis on those chunks. Some of our VOD clients in particular, some of them aren't so, I guess, demanding about what those requirements are, but there are others that obviously are. And our playout product in particular, because they're SSAI providers that are back-ended by a lot of that, we have 40 to 100 millisecond response time across that whole product. And that's something I'm quite proud of, because we need to be able to make those latencies for the ad servers, for the providers. In a lot of cases, we regionalize those ad providers so that the ads that are being executed for any particular web call is close to proximity of the requester as possible. And we regionalize those. But all of that data matters. So in time, we continuously improve the response time for all of our clients across the platform. We are we're not only multi-CDN, we're multi-cloud. So our origins also change. So if we're running, we run on 3 of the 5 largest CDNs in the world, and we run on 2 of the 3 largest cloud providers in the world. So we are constantly measuring egress, we are constantly measuring latency, and we're distributing content across all of the CDNs. And a lot of the times we have an inherent, there's an inherent known construct that, live is going to behave differently than VOD. And we isolate and segregate that traffic accordingly. Because the surge demand is a little bit different. So we allow our clients to not only move or change CDNs themselves right within the platform, we allow our own platform to say, look, I want to send this traffic over here for this specific type of live stream or that specific type of content. Whereas VOD, it's a completely different caching model, different policies. So we allow that as well.
Very flexible. Good. Emily, if you look at NS1, like you said, you're doing this for very big clients, steering traffic, etc. So what are your big considerations in steering traffic to maintain the best QoS for end users?
Yeah. So what we like to think about is, what is the real user monitoring is what we kind of try to focus on here. So we're thinking about things like what's the performance look like from the actual end users. So things like what does availability look like from users all over the globe, or what does time to last byte look like, or throughput. And I think that the QoE component is actually also really important here. So it's a measurement component, but also making sure we're effectively using that data for decisioning and automating what that looks like.
Okay, good. Pierre, you have a little bit different approach, of course, with your setup. Can you elaborate a little bit using your load balancing mechanism and your P2P mechanism, how that actually improves QoS for the end users?
Yeah, of course. I mean, at Centurion, we really looking at the QoS across like the entire workflow. Obviously, we one of the biggest CDN operator as well as internet backbone in the world. So we spend quite some time there looking at all the metrics at what's going on. But recently, and obviously the acquisition of StreamRoute is a good example. It's like we're also trying to look at it from the end user perspective. And really what we been building at StreamRoute is client-side technology that's not only looking at what's going on, and there's a lot of good analytics technology that can measure the performance, the QoS, the bit rate, obviously the track switches, the startup time. All of that is very important to measure it. But we also looked at it as like, can we act from the device? That's something we actually can do not only on the networking part and on the back end or the DNS level, but directly from the device. And this is really where we spent a lot of time and effort on building first the peer-to-peer technology, so leveraging the end user devices and the last mile network as a way of sending bits and bytes. And by measuring the different sources, the different CDN, as well as the different peers and users that are watching the same content, can we be more efficient to get the content from the other user? And this is really the logic on not only looking at what's going on, but can we make decision there? And can we make decision on switching the CDN from the device or switching the different sources, leveraging the peer-to-peer network that we're building? And really it's been very interesting to see the results of this solution. I mean, like the intelligence that you can build by working in collaboration with the video player, basically. Because the video player is there, is making decision, and you work in collaboration with him because you're going to measure more things that he's able to measure with the additional layer that we're bringing within the video player. So yeah, it's been very interesting. I think this obviously live is really important use case, and it's driving a lot of the adoption of this kind of technology. You want to make sure that you can build reliability in your architecture. So meaning multi-CDN is obviously the first pass, but also peer-to-peer as another way of delivering content, as another CDN, additional sources. And there's a few examples where we've seen dramatic improvements on the QoS, meaning like buffering ratio or bitrate ratio, especially in hard to reach region. CDNs, not all the CDN are performing as well as in all the different regions. And there's some region where all the CDN have struggled because there's just not enough interconnection and capacity with the ISP network. So none of the CDN can actually perform very well. But bringing a peer-to-peer technology in that use case where you're using some of the capacity inside the last mile. So you're bringing additional capacity without actually building pipes. And because we have this client-side logic of making the decision on whether or not it's the right decision to go to the CDN or go to the peer network, where you see some pretty big improvement on buffering ratio metric, for example.
Good. Ken, if you heard a little bit like this, then I see QoS is not only looking at one specific part, but a variety of variables as part of the whole workflow, but in the end determines the QoS. The same in terms of the different networks that are related, etc. So it's very, I call it separated. You come from a managed background where you've been with Telestream managing managed networks. How does that differ? Going back to your managed approach, and you're now going into an internet measurement as well with your new product. What are the takeaways that you've taken from the managed QoS measurement monitoring that you're taking into the internet version?
Yeah, so I mean, our monitoring solutions were really initially designed over the last 15, 20 years to serve folks that operated their own distribution networks. So starting with like cable and telco providers, but we also sell extensively into CDN providers who have always sort of, I mean, for them, having a thorough understanding of how the content is reaching the audience and at every point in that distribution chain where things might go wrong, being able to sort of validate exactly where things are breaking down and how that's impacting their ability to reach their audience was something not just valued, but it was an essential quality of what it means to be a CDN or a cable provider. With direct consumer services, you know, one thing that we've seen is there's this rush to build a viable OTT channel, right? I'm going to leverage best of breed CDN partners. Maybe I deliver a mezzanine feed just like I'm accustomed to doing through a SAT provider to a downlink where maybe a third party is taking that content and packaging and making it accessible for my OTT application. Maybe I'm doing that prep work myself, but very rarely does the direct consumer OTT publisher really fully own end-to-end how they're reaching their audience. And so I think sort of getting a viable channel up and running was sort of goal one, and everybody sort of has sort of figured that part out. And now it's wrapping that in, you know, in the ability to sort of quantify are my CDN partners doing a good job of reaching my audience in all locations? And you saw this emerging need for more and more client analytics tools. Now you have with products like our Optic product where I can deploy in cloud, public cloud data centers. I can simulate end user experiences across different geographies and get back real objective quality of service metrics as delivered in those regions. And then you come back one step further. I want to measure the health and availability of assets on the origin. Come back another step. I want to see what I'm contributing into my either third party or production environment for reaching that audience. Am I delivering a quality feed there? Because each one of these points could introduce impairments that are going to impact things downstream. So if I'm just measuring at the client and I see I've got a challenge there, degraded video quality or asset availability challenge or otherwise, you know, something's not quite right there, being able to sort of track back into not just the delivery network, but all the way back into the production environment and measure and understand exactly what the health and performance of that channel is something that hadn't traditionally or wasn't the top of mind requirement when building these direct consumer services. And now as they've become, in some cases, the lead to reaching my audience, not just a sort of secondary second screen experience, but this is actually how I deliver content to my audience. It's certainly become paramount for our customers to have that visibility. You know, and so that's been, you know, by the way, there's a second element to that, and that kind of coincides with what I think you're talking about here with not just measuring at each point, but those points have become different as well. Whereas it used to be you owned the encoders and the packagers and the processing units that are responsible for delivery. Oftentimes now you may own them, but the infrastructure is not yours, or you may not own them at all. You may be doing that through third-party services. And so being able to deploy monitoring in environments that you don't necessarily operate yourself is another sort of important element there to getting that kind of visibility.
Good. Stephen, if you look at quality, right? Quality costs money. That is a fact of life. Do you have customers that say, okay, I want to sacrifice QoS over, I want to sacrifice performance over price because they're, for instance, ad funded and want to make sure they have pricing. Is that a consideration? Do you give that option to your customers, or is it always QoS first?
No, all the time. Look, ultimately, it's not my content. Ultimately, it's my client's content. So, of course, we run into situations where, you know, listen, I want to have a much higher bit rate on my upper tier of my ABR than what comes out of stock. And we let our clients kind of adjust that as they go. But we also take into consideration, you know, where the viewers are, where are these consumers? Because that's going to dictate a lot of what is possible, what is capable from a QoE perspective. You know, 4K is pretty dominant on a lot of the coasts and parts of the country that have sufficient bandwidth to maximize that actual viewing experience. So there's only certain niche clients that particularly want to go after those specific bit rates and or aspect ratios. And we adapt the platform to those needs. But I also want to back up what Ken says. You know, I also came from private equity and hedge fund area where MPLS was king and point-to-point was everywhere. And a lot of the cable providers that we worked with used the best Cisco's in the world and Junipers and all the fun stuff. But unfortunately, but now it's not unfortunately, I'm glad it is. It's a more decentralized internet, but it is the Wild West. Every packet and every chunk that transverses this national network, this worldwide network that we have, is in the hands of someone else. And that's one thing that we purposely built Zype to do. And a lot of people may not know this, that it's quite modular, the platform, but there is a patent that Zype has. And it's built around the construct of a rules engine that takes into all of these variables into account for the most part. Where is the request coming from? Who is the request going to? What provider did? What's the video source? And weighs all of these systematically, instantaneously, and then delivers that end product. And this is for distributing video on the internet. And one of the advantages of doing that is that we were able to scale in any particular one section, because, and what I mean by that is it's not just video content that we're talking about, QoS or QoE. If the request is never served during a rush, then nobody's going to watch anything. And what I mean by that is actual get requests to get the video or a posting of a login. So QoE extends into the platform as a whole. The players need to be able to render. The embeds need to be able to be pulled up. I have to have my thumbnails cached globally. So all of that. And something actually, I've given a talk, I think last Streaming Media West, about a very similar process that Ken had mentioned. We built our own QoS metrics that ran on AWS and Google, where it acts like a player and it makes requests from all the available regions that a cloud provider has in the world, testing all the CDNs that we leverage just to measure them against each other in a quasi-scientific fashion. I mean, there's a lot of math that goes into a lot of those requests.
Yeah. Interesting. Pierre-Louis, CenturyLink, so you offer a multi-CDN solution yourself. So Zype has built their own. It's part of their service that we offer. CenturyLink or Streamroot has their own as well, but you're also a CDN yourself. So are we looking, Verizon Media does something similar where they also offer a multi-CDN switcher as part of their service as being a CDN. Are we looking into a future where CDNs actually are becoming multi-CDN themselves, leveraging each other's resources?
Well, this is a very interesting view. So basically, yeah, you're right. As part of CenturyLink, as part of the acquisition, and even before that, I mean, CenturyLink has not discovered the multi-CDN because of the acquisition. I think they always really embraced this approach. most of our customers are using multi-CDN technologies, and we want to have a play there because we believe that we know how networks are working. We know very well how to make the right decisions. So we also have our own view on how to do multi-CDN in a proper way. I don't think that today CDN are ready yet to provide another CDN as part of their service, but I'm sure we're going to see that coming. I mean, we know our strengths, we know our weakness, we know where we're good, we know where sometimes it makes sense for us to invest in a certain region and less in another region. And perhaps another CDN made the investment the other way around, and that makes sense that either as the end user, you want to discuss with these two CDN at the same time, or you want to trust one of your partner because you love working with CenturyLink and you want to give them more flexibility to do that. And really, the product that we're providing as the multi-CDN switching is completely independent from the performance of any of the other CDN. It's really taking into account what we see on the clients. So what's the performance of the different CDN when we are downloading a segment from them. And really, I think we really embrace it. We know that our customers will use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 CDNs. Some of the biggest customers are our customer, and we know they're using multiple partners. Obviously, we want to show that we are the best. We want to show that where we have the capacity, we can show the best performance. But we're not against it. We really embrace it. And if you're looking at some region like Asia, like APAC, where CenturyLink has been investing massively lately, where a lot of these local players are using only one CDN, and providing a multi-CDN tool is actually for us a good way to say, hey, Mr. Customer, use this multi-CDN tool, try our CDN and see if we're performing as good as the one you're using, or as the local CDN you're using, or like another only one CDN you're using.
Good, thanks. Emily, this is actually the follow-up question on of Pierre. About 50% of all the media-related media players use already a multi-CDN strategy, but 50% still doesn't. Do you have any idea what is holding back the other 50% of going into multi-CDN?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of the challenge is that there's a lack of commonly adopted standards. So there is knowing the fact that you're going to have to go ahead and, make sure you have your content equally available across all of the CDNs. And then you've also obviously got to have something to do intelligent decisioning across that. So it's effort, and it's something that people need to realize the value in to even go ahead and adopt it. But I also think that some companies, this is definitely in the minority, but they're definitely seeking to follow sort of more of the Netflix model and building out their own network. So even though I guess you're saying like 50% sort of adopt multi-CDN, there's probably a small portion of those that aren't adopting that are also thinking about how do they, I guess, build their own edge network.
Yeah, I would add something on this topic as well. Like, I think there's that people are afraid of the complexity that might bring. Obviously, you're adding another component, you're adding complexity. I mean, that's part of the game. And like, I mean, like Steven said, like it can be the Wild West, like what's going on there. There's too many players pushing my bits and bytes. But so I think it's yeah, you need, definitely there's additional complexity, but that comes with quality. So it's kind of a trade-off to make. Yeah. If you want to build like a state-of-the-art, really good, best performance, make sure that you can deliver good quality in every region, well, it comes with additional complexity, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Ken, what I've heard about this session, but early discussions as well, it's a lot about data. In what way do you think AI, machine learning, etc., will eventually take over all that kind of monitoring, decision making, etc. in the end? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, it's certainly a good application for machine learning, right? So if you think about what goes into formulating a good QoS metric analysis, right? There's a lot of different metrics that impact a QoS sort of aggregate score that determine ultimately, are there impairments in your OTT service that are having an impact on the audience? And even just measuring within threshold, I might have within threshold deliverables, but in aggregate, that combination of thresholds. So there's a bunch of different dimensions that any one of which might on its own not be a major problem, but combined are contributing to a poor viewer experience. And then lastly, correlating, this rich set of client analytics with the objective analysis that you have at the CDN edge, at the content origin, in the packaging environment, and all the way upstream into the production environment. You're talking about many, many different measurements that creating sort of an actionable insight from that collection of metrics is something that machine learning AI solutions are particularly good at sifting through and bubbling up the important and relevant information. I do think that there's also, in addition to just simply presenting insights, hey, you're having a problem, one of the things that we're seeing is a big push to create more of a self-healing, self-optimizing infrastructure stack around what is being produced and distributed to the audience. Whether that's VOD or live, having a feedback loop of QoS and QoE analysis that feeds into that production system such that my encoders in real time can dynamically respond to hints coming in from a QoE measurement downstream, or my network can dynamically respond to a hit in a specific geography as measured through these QoS or client analytics tools. These self-optimizing infrastructure components are something that our customers, so the initial thing was sort of multi-CDN. That's going to save me because if any one CDN is underperforming, I can switch my traffic to another. And that does certainly help. But if my problems are being introduced upstream in the infrastructure I'm using, or my partners, my third-party service providers are using to reach my audience, that's going to be impactful. If I could have that analysis feeding directly into that system to route around issues and to continuously sort of improve the production of what I'm distributing, that's sort of, it's the holy grail, I guess, right? But it's something that you're starting to see be attainable by pulling together the metric data and the infrastructure environment.
Okay, good. Before we go ahead into Q&A, a small question for all of you, basically. Knowing everything in relation to the whole Corona stuff, etc., everybody's looking at cutting down cost. How much focus is cost cutting in terms of getting insights in QoS and QE as part of that? Do you see a lot of savings on that being done, or are people just still seeing the value of it and don't want to touch this?
I think that cost cutting is, improving QoS is inherent to that. They're kind of tied together. The more you look at your own data, the more you're looking at your client's delivery, you're going to start to see, well, there's that suboptimal, this is suboptimal, this is suboptimal. So it's iterative, and I think that they're inherently joined. And the more you want to cost cut, the more you're going to pick up improvements on QoS and QA.
I would just add one other thing there. That I don't know that this necessarily would fall under the title cost cutting, but one thing that has been pretty apparent is that delivering a live, and maybe with this coronavirus pandemic situation, this is a little less true right now, but leading up to this, there's been this big push to kind of move from a traditional linear channel model for live distribution into events that offer much richer, over-the-top live events that offer much richer audience engagement through multiple cameras, different distributions, more live events being produced more affordably because it's easier to do now. And so with that is this notion that, man, I have licensing rights to 100 events next year that I could distribute. And traditionally, I would have picked which ones are going to make it onto my linear channel, which ones are going to kind of fill in at 2 a.m., on some recorded session. And now I can offer my audience a completely live experience, but investing the capital expenditures to build out that environment to support this distribution has been sort of a gating factor. And now with more and more cloud services enabling folks to be able to contribute content and produce professional looking results and have that delivered with very, very little sort of capital investment in the infrastructure required to carry a live OTT channel and the monitoring that goes around that to ensure a quality delivery. that's been something that's been driving a lot of the discussions we've had. So it's not really saving them money necessarily, but it's sort of how I'm spending the money in order to support the type of viewing experiences I want to create for my audience. Has been, yeah.
Yeah, what we've seen on the side with Quick is that we've seen two interesting things. I think is one thing, which is an overall traffic growth, but a shift from obviously less linear because there's less events coming on, there's less sports, and much more people staying home and watching VOD assets. So traffic actually growing. So you want to make sure that, and we've seen in Europe with congestion in the network, the regulator coding, everyone in the world say, hey, reduce your traffic. We're gonna crush the ISP. So I think you need to really have good QoS vision in that case. Yeah, and I think the second thing was a little bit of unpredictability. You're in an environment where there's like a political speech would rather like 10 people usually, it's going to get rather like 2 million people. So you need to navigate through this very unpredictable time, which is also on the content and the political news. So there's been two very interesting things we've seen on our networks.
Good. Tom, any questions?
Yeah, we've got some questions from the floor here. So first one is from Nick, who spoke earlier. Can anyone's QoE product connect data back to the end customer churn? For example, customer X has been a customer for 6 months and has seen 6 buffering events each month versus new customer in Y trial, and then attempt to try to save the customer before they churn. There's a reasonably interesting one.
I know. I have an answer, but I wanted to give the speakers a chance here.
No, I mean we're not providing that kind of data on our side. We really focus more on the pure technical analysis. But I know there's several providers in the markets that's more like on the analytics front. I know that people like Nice People at Work or even Conviva are looking at being more marketing data and joining the marketing data with the data that are coming from the technical piece and kind of making the bridge there. But this is not something that we're doing. We're really focused on the technical aspect.
Yeah, I can say that.
Mark, you've got a comment.
But this QE metrics, like they're saying, and the other side is subscriber information that you're getting and what you're doing, etc. And these two basically depend on how you can see churn in relation to each other.
Cool. And just one last quick question, which might be just a simple yes or no answer for people. But Robert Welsh is asking, what are the thoughts on the use of blockchain ledgers for the use of QoE compression and QoE at the edge?
I mean, there are different.
I was just going to say, I think it's interesting. I haven't actually spent a lot of time on it myself, but yeah, I definitely think it's interesting.
I mean, there are different tests basically on compression on the edge, on delivery on the edge, so CDN, blockchain CDN kind of stuff. You can do the same on QE as long as you have a ledger somewhere that can perform a QE test. You can basically use them as agents. So technically, there are possibilities. I've not seen it as such yet, but for CDN, compression, encoding, transcoding, yes, that's already there.
Well, I'm going to ask you to wind up here, Mark, because we've run over slightly. I think just a little chip-in comment there. I think somebody needs to look at blockchain as a solution for track and trace for COVID, but it's not going to be. Anyway, Mark, just see the panel out, please, and then we'll hand over. So.
Yeah, thank you all, guys, and Emily, for joining it, and